Welcome to Gut Punch, the podcast that explores life-changing moments. Hosted by Kathryn Lancioni, a seasoned educator with personal insights into resilience. Kathryn shares how life can change in an instant, shaping our path forward. Each episode features inspiring guests who face their own gut punch moments. Guests share their journeys through loss, upheaval, and triumph. What to expect: honest conversations, lessons in resilience, inspiration for growth. Join Kathryn as she highlights courage and perseverance in every story. Gut Punch is a reminder that there is always a path forward. Be part of the conversation. Register now to join Kathryn for today's journey.
Welcome back to Gut Punch. We're right in the middle of an incredible story from Kathryn Lancioni about her gut punch. Kathryn's going to be the host of this podcast going forward. I'm just here to introduce her to you and have her tell you her story. So if you haven't listened to the first episode, after this one, you might want to go back and listen to it. But for those of you that did, just a brief recap. Kathryn is a healthy, vivacious woman, just at the prime of life, enjoying life. She and her daughter go on the trip of a lifetime for a high school graduation trip, and Kathryn gets sick. When she gets home, she's put in the hospital, and the way we left her the last time was she was in a coma. She was in a medically induced coma for 2 weeks. So, Kathryn, I want to welcome you to your show.
Thank you.
We'll pick up the story, but just say hello to the audience and maybe just a little bit about who you are.
Yeah, hello everybody, and if you're returning, thanks for coming back for the second part of our series here. So I'm a mom, I'm a wife, I'm a college professor, I'm a communications coach, and I'm going to be the host of this podcast once it's officially launched. And I'm an avid runner, avid tennis player, and I don't know, just love being alive. And really delighted to be able to share this story with you because I hope it'll inspire.
Trust me, it is inspiring. I've had the opportunity to talk with you and read some of the things that you've written about this experience, and it's an incredible story. So, Kathryn, let's pick it up where you're in this coma. Your family is really surrounding you. They don't know if you're going to make it through or not. But now, 2 weeks later, you're coming out of that coma. Talk to us about what's going on, what you're feeling, what you're thinking at this time.
Yeah, well, before I get to that part of it, I do want to clear up a few things that misnomers people have about comas, right?
Okay, yeah.
You can actually hear what people are saying when you're in a coma. So and it's funny, so I have like my coma memories and then my coming out of coma memories. So I was in this medically induced coma. I had people around me all the time because there were all these machines hooked up to me, monitoring my vitals and everything else that they needed to monitor. I was hooked up to dialysis the entire time I was in the coma. I was on things monitoring my heart, my brain, all of that, because they did not know what version of me I was going to be when I woke up. But my brain's always been pretty active, and it was definitely active when I was laying there in this medically induced coma. So one of my favorite stories is I remember overhearing a male nurse talk about what he was going to be doing during the eclipse that hit in April of last year.
Yeah.
And he said that he was going to be up in Lake Placid, New York, and he was going to be there with his girlfriend, and he was going to be skiing and hanging out and just chilling and having a great time. So once I woke up from the coma, which was before the eclipse, he came by a few days after the eclipse had occurred. And I whispered to him, because I didn't have my voice fully back yet. I said, "Did you go to Lake Placid?" And he looked at me and said, "How did you know I was there?" And I said, "Oh, you talked about it one day when I was laying in bed." And he goes, "You heard what I was saying?" And I smiled and I said, "Oh, yes." And he said, "Well, what else did you hear?" And I said,
That's what I want to know. What else
right?
did
And
you hear?
I said, "Well, I heard that you talk about that the fried chicken that the hospital gives you guys is not very good and that you're sick of it." And I shared a few other little nuggets that he had spoken to me about. So, you're in a coma and people think you're out of it, but you kind of really aren't.
So what does
And
that
then
feel like? You are a communications person.
yes,
You talk for a
a living.
living. What's it like to hear and not be able to communicate yourself?
It's horrible. And it was horrible. And like, as I mentioned, when I woke up, I had no voice. And that was because I had been intubated for 2 weeks. I'm almost in the coma. And when they intubate
Yeah.
you, I guess it affects your vocal cords. So I woke up, didn't know where I was, had no idea. It took me days. No one told me, oh, you're in New Jersey in a hospital. It took me days to figure out what it was. But I woke up and I looked out the window and I remember seeing the water, the rain. It was raining and the rain was cascading down the outside of the, the window pane. And the sky, of course, was very gray. And I knew something bad had happened, clearly. But
Yeah.
I actually thought I was in a hospital in New York City. I don't know why I just did. And so I wake up and I don't know how long it was, but a few minutes later, the doctors and nurses were in the room and I was fired a series of questions, right? Do you know where you are? Do you know what day it is? Do you know do you know your name? Do you know who the president is? And remember, I'm intubated, so I can't really talk like I normally do. I had to
Right.
whisper. And I remembered everything. The only thing I couldn't remember was actually my iPhone password. But I remembered my name, my birth date, who the president was. I guessed on the month that I was right. And then after I answered all the questions, they said, do you know what happened? And I shook my head. And they just said, you were very, very sick. We had to put you in a medical coma for a while so your body could heal. And no one told me at that time the severity of what had happened because, it's a lot. But
Yeah.
the frustrating part for me was I couldn't talk. And it was very, very hard. I didn't have a voice for about 10 days. So my parents would come, my husband and my kids would come to see me. And all I could do was nod and smile. And they didn't feed me for a month because for 2 weeks when I was in the coma and then 2 weeks when I came out because I couldn't really process liquids or anything really. So I had no energy and I couldn't even move my arms. So I couldn't write either. So I couldn't push the remote for the TV, literally could just nod my head and smile. And, slowly my voice came back. It took a solid 2 weeks before I could really
How
speak
long were
words.
you hospitalized after the coma?
So I was in the acute care facility in the hospital until April 30th. So I checked it on the 23rd. I checked out on the 30th, and then I was sent to a rehab center. I was off of the monitoring devices, most of them, after about 4 weeks.
Okay.
But the reason I was there for 5 weeks was I couldn't sit up because I had been laying back for so long. And, when you're in a bed and not moving, everything gets all out of whack. And they needed me to be able to sit up for more than 30 seconds without feeling dizzy
Right.
before they could send me to rehab. So I was in the hospital for 5 weeks
And
and then in rehab for 2.5 weeks.
what's going on in your head during those weeks that you're awake? You now know at least some of what happened to you. What are you thinking? What are you doing all day?
So when I first woke up from the coma, I just really watched a lot of television. I got very engaged with the 𝐇𝐨𝐬𝐭, all 4 hours of it. I discovered a lot of new shows that I had never seen before. I watched a lot of March Madness because I was in during March Madness. So I watched every basketball game that was on. I went from the 𝐇𝐨𝐭 to basketball pretty much, or really bad network television. So I watched a lot of TV because I couldn't really do anything else. And I thought a lot about how I could back to being me.
Yeah.
Because as I said in the first episode, I was very, very happy with where I was, both personally and professionally. I had worked very hard to get there. And I knew, even though I was laying in bed, couldn't move, and had no voice, which is pretty horrible, I knew I could get back to the version of me that I wanted to be, but I knew that it would take time. So every day I thought about what was it that I could do to get 1 centimeter closer to being me, whether it was trying to use my voice a little bit, trying to move my hand, trying to raise my arm. The hospital has PT and OT people that come in and they try to move you around and, get you to do something. So I would ask them, especially kind of about a week after I woke up from the coma, I asked, could I have squeezy balls? And so I could start moving my hand. I asked for 1-pound weights because I wanted to be able to try to strengthen my arms.
Yeah.
So no one asked me to do it, but I set, mini milestones for myself to try to every day just get a little closer to
You're
being
fighting
me.
from the first day. You're fighting to get back. Yeah.
I was because, for someone who had been ferociously independent, I had become 100% dependent on the world around me. I couldn't sit up. I couldn't feed myself. I couldn't hold a cup of water. I couldn't get out of the bed to go to the bathroom. I couldn't stand in front of the mirror and wash my face. I couldn't do anything that I wanted to do. And that was really hard. I will admit I am, very type A. I like to be in control of things, and I couldn't be. And that was really hard. And there's that saying, patience is a virtue. Boy, is that true.
Yeah.
when I woke up, as I said, they told me what had happened. And about a week later, when I had a little bit of a whisper voice, I said to the doctor, I said, what do I need to do to be back in the classroom in September? Because as I mentioned, I'm a college professor. And he laughed. He's like, oh, really? Okay, well, you need to do everything I tell you to do. And you could tell by the tone and the attitude that he was like, there is absolutely no way.
No way. Yeah.
And guess what I was? I was back in that classroom in September.
That's fantastic.
Yep.
Yeah. Well, let's talk. You're going into rehab. You're leaving the hospital. You're going into rehab. You're fighting every day to get stronger, to get back to where you were. Talk us through what was going on at that time.
So I was desperate to get to rehab because I knew medically I was sound, right? I
Yeah.
couldn't sit up. I kept getting dizzy. But apart from that, I was like ready to go because I knew once I got to rehab that was really the beginning of the recovery, right? When I was in the hospital, my organs were recovering. But physically, I wasn't recovering. I wasn't seeing massive amounts of physical progress because I couldn't get up and walk around. Yes, eventually I could hold a glass of water. Yes, eventually I could feed myself. And yes, eventually I could definitely change the TV, the channels on the remote. But I was not able to walk. So finally, one day in the hospital, I was able to sit up. And they call it dangle your feet off the side of the bed. And I was able to do that for 5 minutes. And they were like, okay, you can go to rehab. So they had been
You had to
talking.
feel like you just won a marathon.
Oh my God.
Yeah. I mean, it had to feel so great.
It was just like, it was the silliest thing. But at that moment in time, it was the most important thing.
Yeah.
And again, this is something that we all take for granted. Like we're both sitting up here talking, right?
Right.
I couldn't do this.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that was weird and crazy. And just like, what do you mean I can't sit up? Right. But I finally did it. So the next day they transferred me to the rehab facility and I get to the rehab facility and they, it's 3 hours of PT every day. And I did not need speech therapy because I was, able to talk. And by the way, I should mention they had assessed that there was no neurological damage, which was a huge, huge, huge thing for everybody. And about a week before I went to rehab, we got the news that I no longer needed to be on dialysis. So that was an absolutely wonderful message to have.
Yeah.
People have asked me what was the toughest part about being in the hospital. And I think there's two parts that were hard. One was not being able to communicate initially when I woke up. And the second was the dialysis. I don't know if anyone who's listening has had relatives that have gone through dialysis, but it's absolutely horrible. You're connected to this machine that's kind of like cleaning out your blood. It's 3 to 4 hours, and I would just lay there. And they would come in at 8:30 in the morning and set up, and then I'd be on the dialysis for about 4 hours till about 1:30, from 9:30 to 1:30, and then they would clean up, so it'd be about 2. And I would kind of come in and out of consciousness, just kind of trying to sleep through it. And then
Yeah.
I would be just absolutely beyond fatigued the rest of the day. And it was terrible because I knew what they were doing. And it was also terrible because I didn't know if I'd ever not have to do that.
Not have to do it. Yeah.
Yeah. And that thought was very scary to me. I was like, well, if I'm on dialysis for the rest of my life, how am I going to travel? I mean, and I had, I've been all over the world, thankfully. I'm very fortunate. And so the thought of not being able to do that was just not being able to really live the way that I wanted to live was very, very, very intimidating.
It had to be an emotional roller coaster, just day in and day out.
It was.
Yeah.
And it was. And, again, for someone who is so type A, who likes to plan every morsel of her life, I went months, even after out of the hospital, I went months without being able to plan anything because I didn't know what each day was going to bring.
So you're in rehab.
Yep.
And in your physical therapy, I think you said 3 hours a day of physical therapy. How long were you in rehab and what things were you able to accomplish physically, emotionally during that time?
Okay. So I get to rehab on April 30th. So May 1st, they come in, they introduce the therapist that I'm going to be working with. And they're like, okay, it's time to go to the gym. And I'm all excited, right? Because I'm like, it's a gym. And it was actually a beautiful gym. And I remember, this is someone who worked out every day. So I was like,
Yeah.
give me the weights. I'm going for it. And so I'm in the bed. And at this point, I'm able to sit up, but I'm not able to walk. And that's part of the reason I was in rehab. So they have this thing called a Hoyer lift, which picks you up and moves you to wherever you need to go. And I looked at that thing and I thought about who I was and where I wanted to be. And I was like, no. And my PT person looked at me, she said, what do you mean no? I'm like, no, we are not using that. She's like, well, then how are you going to get from the bed to the wheelchair? I said, I'm going to do it myself. And she looked at me and said, okay, do it. So I sat up and I scooched to the side of the bed and I said to her, are the brakes on the wheelchair? She's like, yes. And I reached over and I slid myself into the wheelchair and I looked at her and I said, are we good? And she just started to laugh and she goes, we're more than good. So we went into the gym and it's big and there's weights and there's all this Nautilus equipment. I'm like, I am so freaking happy, right? Because like, this is kind of what I had dreamed of. Within 48 hours, I was up walking with a walker. And then 48 hours after that, I was walking without anything. And the day that I chose to try walking without the walker, my PT person wasn't there. It was somebody else was subbing for her. So Sienna was the one that I worked with, who I really owe a lot to. And she comes back to me. She's like, wait, you decided to walk the day that I wasn't here? I said, well, yeah, And she said, what was it? What was it that prevented you from doing this a day ago? I said, I was afraid.
Yeah.
And she said, what were you afraid of? And I said, I don't know, but I was. And I said, but I've decided my new mantra is if I don't do it, I won't know if I can. Every day from like day 4, I walked a little bit more, and they have you doing a circle around the gym, and then you start doing it a hallway. And anyway, I was going all over place. They actually kicked me out of rehab a week early because I was walking so much and so physically able, more than they thought I was going to be at that point. They're like, you need to go home. And I was like, wait, I'm supposed to be here for 3.5 weeks. And this was like at the 2-week mark. And they're like, no, you have to go home. Like, you're basically dancing in this gym. And I negotiated 48 hours more just so we could get everything set for me to come home. But I think I have the award for being kicked out of rehab the earliest.
That's excellent.
Yeah. So I was there for 2 weeks and 3 days. And by the time I left, I was able to do stairs. They have all these different boxes you have to check, get in and out of a car, walk without any assistance. And that was wonderful. But it was all me constantly reminding myself of my motto. If I don't do it, I won't do it, or I won't know if I can.
Can do it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I'm going to pause this right there, Kathryn, because we've reached our time on this episode. And so in our next episode, we're going to talk about coming home from rehab, where you are today, health-wise, but then we're also going to talk about lessons learned. What do you take away from this? And I think that's one of the valuable aspects of a gut punch, is to learn from the experience and carry that, what you've learned, carry that forward. So with that, I'm going to bid adieu again on this episode, and we will see everybody back here for the next episode in a few weeks.
That's it for today's episode of Gut Punch. I hope you found inspiration, because no matter how hard life hits, there's always a way forward. Make sure to follow or subscribe to Gut Punch on your favorite podcast platform. If you know someone who could use a little inspiration, share this episode with them. Thanks for listening, and until next time, stay strong. See you in the next episode.